Okay, at this time, my friends Dr. Fran Washington and his wife are going to do a reading for me.
I feel very, very fortunate to be in the midst of the family members. In case you don't know it, I was very pleased to see that the book that we published with one of the stories in it is on the table over there. So I'm going to count how many of you are in here before I leave. And that, because then the publisher will tell me that's how many copies were bought, okay? So don't forget that. But for a long time, we've been doing this particular piece since you brought it to us for a couple of years now. And I really do feel that I am a part of the family. One thing that we often tell people that we enjoy doing, and that is giving breath, life, and voice to those who have gone on. And so I feel very, very close to John. I don't know if she knows it or not, but are you going to sing this part here? Can we just do these two?
Right, but first you're going to read. Val has asked us to read from two of the books that you have here. This is from A Stronger Kinship. So before we do our presentation, we're going to read these.
Okay.
All right. She must have been so tired of walking. Elizabeth Connor was moving, and moving in the Midwest in 1866 meant walking. Walking for days through wilderness, through strangers. The wilderness pressed so close that even horses had trouble passing through the roots that tripped and branches that scratched. Elizabeth almost certainly walked with a group of roughly 20, although only 10 of them were adults. Old experiences, old wounds had taught these travelers that there was strength in numbers and in arms. Elizabeth's husband and her brothers-in-law all had weapons she knew had killed many a Southern white man not long ago. So she walked with dear Nancy and Abigail, and they walked alongside husbands. Strangers stared at those dark warriors, and their wives must have had the same urge. The men had walked together for years, over hundreds of miles, walked through mud above their knees, walked through the wrecked bodies of their dead comrades, walked straight into gunfire when everything in them was telling them to run away. Now they walked together with their unfamiliar children, their long-imagined wives, now real, into a dreamed future they planned to make true, a future of fairness and prosperity. Like many pioneers in America's past, they had left a stable and sure place to find a more successful life. That place was the only home Elizabeth had ever known, Mount Pleasant, Cass County, Michigan. Cass County had given shelter to a group of Quakers in the 1830s, who then made it home to any blacks who wanted to come. And they came by the hundreds. Some were escaping slaves, rebelling against the idea that they were owned by anyone. Others were long free, but sought the freedoms the South would no longer offer them. In Cass County, they were able to attend schools, farm their own land, and raise their families. This was more than unusual. It was feared. In the antebellum Midwest, although some white settlers were willing to use African American slave labor, most were averse to the idea of African Americans living near them, especially if they were free. This attitude extended deep into the new Northern Territories. As a legislative committee in Ohio made clear in 1832, free blacks were considered more of a threat than slaves, for they were seen as a corrupting influence. And more important, they infringed upon white employment opportunities. Elizabeth's father, Henry Shepherd, had been among the hundreds who sought shelter in Cass County before the war, and who managed to escape census takers and slave catchers to make a home south of Canada. a home in a nation that was rightfully his. Until he turned 21, Henry Shepherd had been owned by someone. Henry promised himself that on his 21st birthday, he would liberate himself, and he did, walking north as best he could. But north was the direction the winter came from, howling and hard and most freedom, and the most freedom he found was a swamp where he could hide. Henry's feet slowly froze and rotted from the wet ground. But that pain was not as terrible as the loss of liberty, and he must have gone down running, still trying to move even after the dogs found him and the white men recaptured him. The man who thought of himself as Henry's owner may have taken one look at Henry's destroyed feet and felt sure that here was a safe slave, one who would literally never run again. But as soon as he deemed himself recovered, Henry made another bid for freedom. This time he was successful and kept walking north on those rotten feet until he had walked all the way to Canada. Thank you. You know what? There's one more section I forgot to read. I'm sorry. Maybe Canada ended up being too cold for a man who had been brought low by a winter. Michigan wasn't easy, but it was easier and more settled. And it gave Henry a place to become a hero. Although he managed to keep the facts secret from most who knew him, for many years, Henry was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, bringing escaping slaves from Cass County to the next station in Schoolcraft and sometimes beyond. He must have been determined that others would not suffer as he had to find a way to freedom. He married, had a family, had Elizabeth, and then the war came. What could possess an old man, a man with family and a home, a man with freedom, to walk back into the land that had enslaved him? All that had happened to him in those first 21 years of life must have risen up in him, must have taken him to that enlistment station. And then Henry walked again. He walked all the way back to the South with a gun in his hand. And almost all the black men of Cass County went with him.
Hey, that's your blood.
Yeah.
No. And when we find it, it means something to us because we've been looking and searching for ours for many years. I don't have the same regard. I don't have the same luck that you have to know what your DNA has imprinted on it. We have borrowed them for a small amount of time. We're going to give you a little bit of an idea. Oh, I'm going to do it.
Okay, that's first.
Yeah, she's used to telling me what to do.
I already forgot.
But right. What's that? Where's that? Make sure it's put up. Yeah.
No, the women use that.
Yeah, I know that. That's what I want to make sure. So what we'll do is just give you a little bit of an idea of once we run into these particular individuals. And we thank you for helping us to run into this in your family because we've learned a lot about them. I've been studying the Civil War for a long time. My great-great-great-grandfather was a member of the Civil War. He did not have the same outcome working with the Civil War that a lot of them had, but I found him anyway. So what we're going to do is piece a couple of things together, one that you gave me, and then a piece that we did. But I would like for you to hear the beginning because it is with William Bright that much of this happened. So if I can get you to do this, and then the first sentence up to time. Okay?
This is from a story that we wrote based on your family's life. It's called They Fought to Save Freedom. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Hello. My name is William Bright Connor. And in the year of 1849, 14 years before the slavery ended in the South, I brought my wife, 3 daughters and 2 sons from Raleigh, North Carolina, to live as free people on a farm near Vandalia, Michigan.
I'm his oldest daughter, Zelphi. This story begins in the fall of the year 1854, around harvest time. Late one night, after our family had gone to bed, after a hard day of work on the farm, my brother Frank came running into my room screaming at the top of his lungs.
Now I'm going to go to the presentation that you gave. Elizabeth treasured the letter of November 19 for years afterward, holding as it did her husband's promises and dreams for their future. His sweet words that she may well have thought would be the last she would ever read from him. It is more than likely that news of the Battle of Honey Hill, South Carolina, made its way to Pleasant Hill, Michigan, as newspapers were quick to catch the story of the tragic heroism of the Michigan men facing battle for the first time. The Battle of Honey Hill was placed on November 30, 1864, in support of General William T. Sherman's march to the sea. This was a battle fought primarily by black men against white, with at least 6 United States colored troops involved, including the Massachusetts 54th and 55th, as well as the 35th, commanded by Harriet Beecher Stowe's brother, Colonel James Beecher. The Confederate-controlled crest of Honey Hill was covered with men-made defenses that a captain of the Massachusetts 55th Colored Regiment described as a sustainable open earthwork pierced by 4 guns extended 200 feet on either side of the road on the crest of an abrupt slope of about 20 feet. The ground immediately in front of this entrenchment was comparatively open, but at the distance of about 150 yards, a shallow and sluggish stream, expanding into a swamp with a heavy growth of trees and dense underbrush, ran along the whole Confederate front. The soldiers from Michigan almost certainly knew that they were marching against a foe who could well be intent upon their slaughter, even if they surrendered and were taken prisoner. Now we'll go to that battle, as we have recorded it in our book from your notes. Today, all the colored men in my regiment were issued weapons to defend themselves in battle. So, I have been busy attending my duties and cleaning my rifle. I have to stop now and go to roll call.
That was Frank, and this is Zelphia speaking. I was so relieved that H.B., Frank, and John could finally protect themselves, but I was very scared that one of them might get hurt. I didn't say anything to the children because I didn't want them to worry. That was the last letter we got from Frank before they went into battle in South Carolina.
It was the Battle of Honey Hill near Beaufort, South Carolina. It was one of the biggest battles that the colored troops would fight. You could hear many of the colored men singing all the time they were in battle. Huzzah! Huzzah! Oh boy, chains are breaking. Huzzah! Huzzah! bondsmen fast awaken. Huzzah, huzzah, tyrant hearts are quaking, so foot we are making. Huzzah, huzzah, our song shall be. Huzzah, huzzah, that we are free. Huzzah, huzzah. The rebel cannons of the South were lined along the hillside, and there was a huge valley down below with a stream of water and a swamp at the bottom. The Union soldiers had to attack the rebel forces and their cannons on the hill, but the rebels held tight. The first Union soldiers were colored men of 5 regiments, including the 54th and 55th Massachusetts. They all went in first, and they were set on fighting until they had freedom. The 102nd and the 1st and 2nd Colored Infantries of Michigan also joined in. It was a hard-fought battle. The rebel cannons are firing, and the rifles and muskets blasting from both sides. At one point, the rebels were trying to cross the swamp to get to our men, but we pushed them back. The battle seemed to last forever, and we suffered a lot of losses. But in the end, the Union regiments, along with the colored fighting men, with me, H.B., and John in their ranks, proved that we were brave soldiers who worked hard and risked our lives for our country. Honey Hill was one of the last big battles of the Civil War, and although we lost that battle, we felt a lot of pride knowing that we fought to save freedom. Thank you.